Okay, so welcome to Smart Study ACCA. This is our first session. This is our first class. And of course, this is not going to be a very long class. This is going to be an introductory and just a small class. So I'll be telling you about myself, right? You have already told me about you. So I'll be telling you about myself and then I'll be introducing you to the exam, right? And about the subject, of course. So basically, um, my name is Naveed Ur Rehman. You already know me. We have talked before, and I've worked for British Gas for about 8 years. And after that, I'm actually working as a full-time lecturer. So I'm currently teaching in a college also, and these are my online classes. So this is a short introduction of me, and now I'll actually introduce you to the subject, right? Now it's called advanced performance management, right? Advanced performance management. And basically it means that it will be um, another level of your F5 exam, right? Or your performance management exam. So it will be slightly at a higher level, but effectively we are going to have almost the same thing that we have seen in F5. And with that, we are going to see something from P1 and P3 also, and nowadays they call it SBL, right? So we are going to have some common topics, right? And then we are going to have some new topics also, right? So I would say that in order to make it very short, I would say that APM, the Advanced Performance Management, is basically 85% old and only 15% new. And the 85% old will be from mainly your PM exam, your F5 exam, right? It will be a little bit from financial management also, just a little bit, right? Your F9 exam, and about 30% you can say will be from SBL also, right? So now the way we are going to carry our course will be like this. First of all, we are going to have two recorded lectures and we are going to have two live lectures, right? The recorded lectures are mainly going to focus on these areas. And the live lectures are going to mainly focus on these areas, right? So that would mean the 15% new, and that would also mean, the exam practice, right? So which will be definitely relevant to you. So the recorded lectures will be mainly focused on the assumed knowledge. Like for example, you have heard about Porter's 5 forces or the BCG matrix or pestle analysis or SWOT analysis, or for example, a little bit from variance analysis or the costing techniques, right? So that will be actually all covered in the recorded lectures. Now, if you face any problem in those recorded lectures, of course, you can come back to me and ask questions from me, right? And in the live lectures, of course, we'll be just focusing on the new areas, right? Now, of course, in a 3-month session, I would say that, of course, passing the exam is more important as compared to the subject. So I've actually not introduced you to the subject. I've just introduced you to the exam, first of all, like how is it going to be tested, first of all, right? Now, I have a question for you. And the question is that you have heard about the term performance management and you have heard about the term performance measurement. Can you actually tell me what's the difference between performance management and performance measurement? So basically, performance measurement is actually part of performance management. You can say that performance management is a broader term, And performance management is actually part of performance management. I mean, performance measurement is part of performance management. Because if you have to manage your performance, you want to see that how motivated are your employees? Are they actually achieving the target? And if you want to see if they are actually achieving the target, of course, you are going to do the performance measurement. You're going to measure their performance, right? Now, once you measure their performance, you will see if they are achieving the targets or not. If they're not achieving the target, then what can we do to encourage them to achieve the target? What sort of reward system we should have? What are the things that we should consider for the performance targets, for example, right? So there are different things that you are going to consider, and all of them will be linked with each other. All of them will be linked with each other, right? So, for example, if I would say that you have an organization and the organization has a vision. So every organization will have a vision, and the vision will actually focus on what do you want to achieve in long run, right? What the organization actually want to achieve in long run. Now that vision of the organization will be translated into the mission statement, right? That vision of the organization will be translated into a mission statement. And our mission statement, as the word says, it's a statement, right? It's not going to be very long, it's going to be very precise, and it's going to show you that what the organization wants to achieve in long run, right? Now, what do you want to achieve in long run should be also focused on the most important things for the organization that we call critical success factors, the things that you cannot get wrong, the most important factors for the success of the organization, right? So, the critical success factors. So, a vision of the organization will be actually written in a statement, and the statement will focus on what is important for the organization. Now, what is important for the organization need to be measured also. They say what gets measured gets done, right? So if you're measuring something, your employees are going to focus on those areas also. So the measures are referred as the KPIs or the key performance indicators. So in other words, we are saying that the critical success factors, the most important things need to be measured. So the KPIs are actually the measures of the critical success factors, right? And this is actually performance measurement, right? When you're measuring things, right? And on the basis of your KPIs, you actually pay rewards, right? So that's what you can say that this is actually like a bigger picture of performance management, right? If you want to manage the performance, you need to measure the performance also. So the first level is that you need to know that what do you want to achieve in long run. That's the vision of the organization. That need to be translated into the mission statement in a form of a statement. And the mission statement will focus on the most important things of the organization and the most important things, which are the critical success factors, need to be measured also. And on the basis of those measurements, of course, you'll be paying rewards, right? Now, we need to focus on each and every one of them, right? Especially the mission statement. What can be the sort of problems that we can have in mission statement? Like, for example, the mission statement is, let's say, very rigid and you cannot change it, right? Like, for example, I would say that should the mission statement be on the basis of products, or should the mission statement be focused on the most important stakeholders, which in most situations will be, let's say, the shareholders, right? So the mission statement, is it focusing on the shareholders mainly, or is it focusing on the market? Is it focusing on a particular product, right? Does it have any flexibility, right? Which means that, let's say, for example, can it be changed later on? Like, for example, let's say if I have this mobile phone, right? And my mission statement is just focusing on a mobile phone, right, as a product. Then maybe in the future, if I want to introduce any other products, then my mission statement will not be covering that. And in the same way, mission statement in our exam also gets very important. I mean, this is the main aim of the organization. So of course, this will be very important for performance management, and it will be very important for the organization also. The next one is critical success factors. Now, which means the factors which are critically important for the success of the organization. A common problem is that students are going to think that anything is actually critical success factor. No, not everything. I mean, something which is really, really, really important, right? So we are not going to include everything in the critical success factors, and it can be different for different organizations. It's not going to be the same for every organization. Then the KPIs, the measures. Now, the KPIs should be very much closely linked with the critical success factors. Now, I'll give you an example. Let's say, for example, your customers are very important for you. So if the customers are very important for you, how can you actually have a measure which will encourage your employees to be very polite and helpful with your customer? What do you think? What will be the measures to encourage your employees to be very polite and very helpful to the customers? So you said that that you can encourage your employees by looking at the service that they are actually giving to the customers, right?
Right.
And so you are actually right and wrong at the same time, because you are perfectly right that yes, if you want your customers to be satisfied, then the measures should be based on that how many customers are satisfied. But
Right.
this is a common problem. This is a common problem. The problem is that the measures should be very specific measures. I mean, you will be actually a consultant who will be actually helping your client, and you will be advising a specific measure. So you should be actually very clear what you are going to be suggesting your client. So for example, I would say that, let's say if you are in a bank, right? I visited a bank a few months ago, and there were
So
a
it
few.
would be like having a number to say, for instance,
Exactly.
I would service like 3 customers within an hour.
So they were having actually a few kind of smileys over there, right? Not all of them were smiling. The first one was very excited, and the second one was just all right, and the third one was just satisfied. The fourth one was just a little bit upset, and maybe the fifth one was very upset, right? Now, let's say
Okay.
if I'm, let's say if I'm a customer, and if the person sitting is very rude to me, so I'm definitely not going to press this. I'm going to press this. And let's
Okay.
say if I'm very, very happy, then I'm going to press this. So the numbers of satisfied customers from the service could be a measure. Now, this is very, very, very specific, right? The next one is the reward. So we said that the measures need to be linked with the critical success factor. Now, what should be the reward scheme, right? Now, the reward should be um, the reward scheme should be of such that it should be actually encourage your staff members. Like for example, I would say that maybe for one employee, if you give him a voucher of $15, maybe that will be very much encouraging for that particular employee. But for another employee, maybe $15 is nothing, right? So how much reward are you paying? Well, that will be different for whom is getting the reward. Like if the managing director or a senior director is getting a reward, then of course he'll be expecting a different amount, and a junior person may be expecting a different amount, right? But the other things need to be considered. I mean, money is not the prime motivator always, right? It's not always the money. It can be different other things. Like if you are asking your employee that if you work good, we'll actually make you employee of the month. And then we'll put your picture on the wall so that everyone can see you for the whole week or for the whole month, right? So first of all, different things can be considered in reward. But the qualities that we need to consider, first of all, that your reward scheme should be very transparent, right? So that everyone knows that what exactly they have to do in order to get the reward, right? It should be clear. It should be very much clear to everyone, right? It should be the same for everyone. So I would say that it should be fair. It should not be it should not be biased. Like for example, if one employee is getting a reward on doing something, then the other employee should also get a reward on doing the same thing, right? The third thing, that it should be cost effective. So, which basically means that you should not be giving excessive rewards. So, for example, if you think that your employee will be encouraged if we give him, let's say, $50, then why should we pay him $100 if he is getting encouraged even with $50, right? And it should be need based, which basically means that if I'm just giving a small reward to a senior person, maybe he will not be very much encouraged, and he will not be actually struggling that much in order to get the reward, right? So different things need to be considered. Now, performance management will actually consider all these things, right? That what should be the vision of the organization, how the mission of the mission statement of the organization, the critical success factors, the measures or the KPIs, and the rewards, right? So you see, there is a link between all of them, right? They are actually all linked with each other, right? Now, in order to achieve the reward, human beings are very selfish, right? So maybe they are doing everything for the rewards, right? So that's how we are, right? So let's say, for example, if the rewards are over here, then the employees, so let's say here is the employee, in order to get the reward, will try to achieve the measures. And if he achieves the measures, then of course the critical success factor of the organization will be achieved also. And the mission statement will be focused, and the vision of the organization will be focused also. So can you see that when you are actually setting the objectives, right? So it will be from top to bottom, and when you are actually measuring it, it will be actually from bottom to top, right? Now, in our exam, we are definitely going to see these words, the critical success factors and the KPIs, right? There will be definitely a question which will be actually focusing on these areas. Well, of course, there are other things also, but as I told you that performance measurement is actually a very important part of performance management. So our exams are very much going to be focused on the measures, right? Now, can you think about any examples of the different measures, right? What do you think? What are these measures? So yes, these are the measures that you have suggested me, right? And it's perfectly fine. But we actually divide them into two main categories, and that is the
Okay.
financial measures and the non-financial measures, right?
Okay. Okay.
So for example, the one that I actually gave you was a non-financial measure, right? Now the problem is with the financial measures, it was actually more common in the past. Like for example, as you mentioned that on the basis of profitability, for example, the percentage increase in the profit or the percentage increase in sales, for example, or profit margins, for example, the gross profit margin, net profit margin, right? Cash flows, for example, the liquidity measures, right? The current ratio, quick ratio, different other measures like dividend yield, right? Dividend cover, right? Different measures are actually, or the earning yield, right? There are different measures to measure, but that are actually only focusing on financial measures, right? The problem with the financial measures is that you are going to get the figures from mainly the balance sheet statement and the profit and loss statement, which means that it will be relevant for 1 year, and it will be actually focusing on short-term performance, right? Now, nowadays, they think that you are going to see different models in your course, that nowadays there are other measures which are actually focusing on long-term performance of the business also. Like, for example, as you mentioned, the number of satisfied customers, right? How many people are actually satisfied from the service? Now, this is actually focusing on the customers. And of course, if the customers are satisfied, in long run, you're going to achieve your financial goals also, right? Like your profitability will be increased in long run. But if you will just consider on the financial measures, maybe you will be just considering short-term performance. So these are the two kinds of measures. And of course, which one is more important, which one is less important, of course, that is debatable. But I would say that both of them are important. Now, I'll give you some examples of non-financial measures, like, for example, the delivery time, for example, right? Like Pizza Hut, for example, of course, the pizza delivery time, for example, of course, the delivery of the meal, of course, that will be more important for Pizza Hut. Why? Because the customers are actually valuing the service speed. How quickly do you deliver the product to the customer? So the delivery time, for example, right? The other things to consider, for example, is the market share, right? Like how much of the market you had before and how much of the market share you had you have now. Like, for example, let's say previously you had 50% of the market and now you have 60% of the market, right? So yes, there are different things that could be considered, and of course, customer satisfaction rating, for example, right? For the financial measures, we actually discuss different measures, like we said, dividend yield, dividend cover, profit margins, liquidity measures, right? All of them are actually financial measures, right? Now, these are the things that you have already seen in F5. Now, of course, we are going to touch it once again. I'm not saying that you will remember everything, of course. That's the favorite hobby of the students, to forget things, right? So we'll definitely touch these areas once again, but then we are going to add some new things also, some new measures. Like, for example, EBITDA, like, for example, EVA, which will be only relevant to APM, the Advanced Performance Management, right? And you have not seen it before, right? So,
Hello?
yes.
Yeah.
So the F5 area, as I said, that it will be actually covered in the recorded lectures, and of course you can see them. And if you still have any issues, then you can actually let me know. And the new area will be actually covered in the live lectures, right? Well, the live lectures will actually focus on some of the previous assumed knowledge, because that's actually a bigger area also. The assumed knowledge is actually very much, it will be actually from the area that will be the assumed knowledge that you have seen in F5 and P1 and P3 for SBL, right? Or a little bit from F9, right? But as I told you before, I'm not expecting that you'll remember everything, right? So definitely I'll be sending you the recorded lectures, and then you can revisit it. And once you see the recorded lectures, then of course that hopefully you'll be fine with those areas also. So that's the good thing about advanced performance management, which actually makes it very different from the other areas. Like you see, 85%, though it is assumed knowledge, but it means that 85% are related from the things which are something already known to you, and only 15% is going to be new, right? But the way it will be tested will be, of course, different. So even you'll have to assume knowledge, but the way it will be tested will be different, right? So you have a performance management. This was just a brief introduction of the subject and about advanced performance management. And now a little bit about the exam, right? The common mistakes that students normally make in the exam. Well, first of all, your exams are going to be looking quite journal, right? But it doesn't mean that your answer is going to be very journal also. I mean, your answers are going to be very professional and very specific and precise. Because you see, let's say, for example, if you visit a doctor and using his stethoscope, let's say the doctor is actually doing the checkup, and then the doctor tells you that, well, you can have this disease also, you can have this disease also, or maybe you have that disease, or maybe you have that problem, right? You'll be actually confused. Well, you already know that anything can happen, but well, you visited the doctor because you know that you want the exact answer. So that's what your client will be expected from you, that your client will be expecting a specific answer from you rather than a very general answer. So you should not be suggesting a lot of things. You should be suggesting a few things which should be very much relevant to the client's business, right? You need to be very careful with what is the business of the client. Now, what are the things that are important for him, right? And now, what are the things that are important for him? You can actually see it from the mission statement, for example, or any statement given by a senior individual, like, for example, the chief executive officer or the CFO, chief financial officer. If they are saying something, right, of course, that will be important. So, what are the things that the directors are thinking is important? And now, what they think is important will be your critical success factor. And you need to give, let's say, some measures which should be very much linked with the critical success factor. It should not be very general, it should be very specific, right? So common mistake is that students are going to come up with a lot of measures and they're going to say that anything is important for a business, right? No, not everything is important for every business. Let's say, for example, is liquidity important for a business? Yes, it is important for a business, right? But yes, but for some businesses, it will be more important, and for the other businesses, maybe it will be less important, right? So that's the sort of things that you should be very careful in your exam. So first of all, your answers should be very specific, right? To the point. The other thing is that how do you actually write your answer in the exam, right? Now, I would say a headline paragraph approach will be the best approach. So let's say if you have a headline, and let's say once you have the headline, I would say that you should leave one line and actually start explaining things in a form of a paragraph. Your paragraph should be very small, to the point, and then you should try to have another headline, and then come up with another small paragraph. You know, why is this important? Like, you will be thinking, well, we are in the professional level and he's telling us to write it in a paragraph and a headline approach. Because in this way, you see, you are actually forcing your marker to give you marks, right? If, let's say, if you are a marker, what are you going to see in this, right? Well, you're going to say, well, okay, so the candidate has actually made 1 point, so I think I should give him 1 mark for this and maybe 1 mark for the second paragraph, right? So basically, you're forcing or helping him or her to give you marks, right? So you make his life or her life easy, and they're going to make your life easy, right? So a headline and a paragraph approach, that will be the best, right? Each headline and paragraph should be separated with a gap of 1 line in between, right? And of course, you're actually keeping it very separate, right? And it's actually important because of 2 reasons. First of all, it will be very clear that you have made 1 point and the other point. And the other thing is, like, you'll be consuming more paper. So it will actually give heart attack to the person sitting next to you if you will be actually asking for sheets, extra sheets all the time, right? Now, the headline and the paragraph approach. The other thing we said, you should not be actually giving a lot of things which are not important and not very much relevant to your client's business. You should be actually pointing out the things which are relevant to the client business and which are very important for the client business. The third problem, which is a very common problem in the exam, is that when you're actually writing the measures, it should be very specific. I mean, it should not be just like you are saying that we will be measuring the customer satisfaction. No, you will be actually writing the number of satisfied customers, right? It should be a measure. It should not be something very general. The other problems that students normally have, which is the biggest problem, I would say, the biggest problem is that normally students are not going to tell the answer which is actually asked by the examiner. They'll be actually suggesting something which is, or giving an answer which is actually not asked by the examiner, right? Okay, so here is an example. It's a real past exam question, right? And you have the requirements. Now, of course, you will be always short of time in the exam, right? Time is something that you need to manage very carefully in the exam. So we have a question in front of us, and it says, explain why non-financial indicators are particularly useful for public sector organization, illustrating your answer with brief examples relevant to BLA, right? So BLA is actually an organization, and you want to explain, first of all, so explain, I would say always encircle that in your answer, in your question paper, so that you should know exactly what you have to tell to the examiner. So that's how you're going to read the question. Explain why financial performance indicators are particularly useful for public sector organizations. So you have to explain that why non-financial performance indicators, the non-financial measures that we have just talked about, why is that important for a public sector organization? You know, the government owned, for example, public schools or public hospitals, right? So why is non-financial performance indicators? And what do you have to do? You have to explain. Now, if you have to explain, then you don't have to say if something is good or bad. You just have to explain, right? So you need to be very careful with these words. So why is it important? And then it says, illustrating your answer with brief examples. So that would mean that when you are explaining your point, you should be actually giving some brief examples, and that should be relevant to the organization, BLA, right? For 6 marks, right? For 6 marks. Now, 6 marks means that, well, normally they say that each marks carries, each mark will be actually, for each mark, we should be actually spending not more than 1.8 minutes, right? So, and why is that? Because you see, we have 180 minutes, which is 3 hours in our exam, and we actually have to get 100 marks. So we have 100 marks. So 180 by 100 would mean 1.8 minutes per mark we are going to maximum spend. So you see, we will be having reading time in the exam. But you think reading just the question paper once, do you think that will be enough? I don't think so that will be enough. You may have to revisit your question paper again and again, right? To look for different points, right? And that would mean that your target should not be 1.8 minutes per mark. It should be actually 1.5 minutes for 1 mark. So it means for a 6-marker question, you should be actually spending maximum 9 minutes. That's very important, because if you spend more than 9 minutes, of course, you won't be able to complete your 100% exam. And if you don't complete the 100% exam, then the chances of passing the exam will be, of course, less, right? So all you have to get is 50 marks out of 100. But if you attempt 90% of your paper, then you have to get 50 marks out of 90. So of course, the time management, and reading the question very, very carefully what exactly is required. Let's see the next one. It also says explain, or let me see the third one. Discuss the difficulties of measuring qualitative factors of performance, suggesting appropriate solutions. Now, in this question, we actually have two questions. So, first of all, we have to discuss difficulties of measuring qualitative factors. So, what are the things which will be difficult for us to consider in qualitative factors? And then suggest appropriate solutions. Now, qualitative factors, for example, I'll just give you an example. Like, for example, if I ask you if you were drinking coffee, let's say, and I ask you that, how was the coffee? You will say the coffee was, let's say, brilliant, right? I actually liked it, right? Now, how good was it? Is it too good? Is it just good, right? Or is it not that good, right? Well, it's not really clear. By using the just the word that it's good, I think it is not very clear. So maybe the qualitative factors need to be made more quantitative. Like for example, if I ask you, give it rating from 1 to 5, in which 5 means very, the best, and 1 means is just okay, right? So qualitative factors are very difficult to measure. So let's say, so why are they difficult to measure? First of all, you have to explain this, and then you have to give some suggestions, like the suggestion that I have just given you to make it, like for example, rating from 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, for example, right? So in this 7 mark question, which is again 1.5 minute per mark, would mean that you should be maximum spending 10.5 minutes, not more than that, right? That's the maximum, or maybe 10 minutes or 11 minutes, not more than that, right? So two things need to be explained in this question, or need to be discussed in this question. First of all, what are the difficulties, and then your suggestions. So that would mean that your 7 marks need to be divided in these two areas, right? This is something which is very, very, very important. And of course, we are going to do it. We are going to discuss it in each and every question that we are going to practice, right? So that's a very common problem, that if you don't read the question carefully, if you don't understand the question carefully, you will be actually writing an answer which is actually not required. So how many marks are you going to get? Nothing, isn't it? Right? Because you won't be answering what is actually required. So that's a very common problem, and that's the reason why a lot of students, when they actually come back from the exam day, right, they are actually very happy that they actually attempted the exam paper in a very good way, and when the results comes, then of course the results are slightly different. So you need to understand what exactly is the question. So what are the points that we have discussed? Okay, so the points were, first of all, that you should be having a headline and a paragraph approach rather than bullet points. Bullet points are not actually explaining everything, so you should have like a headline or a paragraph approach, number one. Number two, you should be considering the industry or the company or the organization which is actually given to you in the question, and you should be considering what is important for that, what should be the measures that would actually help this particular organization, right? And of course, when you do more and more questions, of course, it will help you to understand. Like for example, you see a not-for-profit organization is not exactly the same like a profit-making organization. So what is important for not-for-profit organization is different from what is important for a profit-making organization, right? And then the third thing is that your point should be very specific, right? To the point. You should not be actually writing too much because you don't have enough time in the exam, right? And the fourth one is reading the question very, very, very carefully. So you should be actually answering what is actually required from you. So you should be reading the question very, very carefully, right? And I would say that if you actually follow these things, I think you'll definitely pass this exam, right? If you practice more and more, and if you follow all these steps, it will actually be very helpful. Now, I kept mentioning a few times that you'll have limited time in the exam. So that's actually a blessing in disguise. So what does that mean? I mean, you don't need to do everything in too much detail. In performance management, in advanced performance management, rather than knowing too much about a few things, this is not actually better, and knowing less about everything is would be actually better, right? If you just know a little bit about everything, that will actually help you a lot in your examination. And that's the reason I normally don't suggest to read the books, right? I mean, I'll be actually providing you with the book also, but I would say that you should not be actually reading the book in too much detail. Rather than that, you'll have the lectures, the live and the recorded lectures. Along with that, your revision kit, and I'll be actually giving you some notes, right? And with the notes, you are going to see some small questions. So after the lectures, when you're done with the lectures, I would like you guys to try all those small questions, right? Like we'll be mainly focusing on the long questions, the big questions, the actual exam questions. But in the notes, you're going to find some small questions, and I would suggest that you guys should actually see those questions also, right? So that's how we are going to do. After the class, of course, I'll be giving you the study material, so you can have that. I'll be giving you the book also. If you don't want to print it, it's perfectly fine. But of course, you need to print out your notes, right? And once with the lecture, I'll be trying my best to follow actually the pattern within the notes. Sometimes I'll be actually changing it a little bit, but mainly I'll be focusing on what is actually given to you within the notes. Our live lectures are mainly going to focus on those areas, right? So that's it. This is it for the first class. Of course, it was just an introduction class, and it was just to introduce you with the subject. And with the exam, of course, because exams are maybe more important than the subject itself, right? Especially right now. And I'll be sending you the study material. And I would like you guys, if you can actually get your study material by tomorrow, that will be very good. If you can't, then at least do it before your next class, right? Is there anything that you want to ask?